What is a soul worth when the warp remembers it better than history does? The question is etched into a flensed slab of adamantine buried beneath Macraggie's polar reliquaries. A question spoken once by a dying remembrancer and never answered. 10,000 years of war have passed since then, and the Imperium pretends not to hear it. Yet in the age of the Indomitus Crusade, when Guilliman's shadow once more stretches across the stars, that question stirs. This chronicle is not sanctioned. Its seals were broken by time, not authority. It speaks of a Primaris warrior born of Calgar's gene line, declared lost in the first storms of the Great Rift. Not slain, not corrupted, simply returned. The archives call him a statistical anomaly. The chaplains whisper another name for such things: omens. When the warp gives something back, it is never the same thing that was taken. He was forged in the earliest, most secretive hours of the Primaris project, when Belisarius Cael still argued with ghosts and half-truths. From the gene seed of Marneus Calgar himself came a warrior designated Valens Acastus, meant to embody the ideal ultramarine reborn, calm, indomitable, unbreakable. He crossed the Rubicon Primaris before the Rubicon had a name. His induction rites were interrupted by alarms howling across the vault world. The cicatrix maledictum tore reality open like a screaming wound, and the fleet carrying Acastus vanished into empiric fire. Officially, he died without ever earning a battle honor. Unofficially, something lingered. Astropaths along the route reported a presence. Disciplined, burning, impossibly focused, moving against the warp's tides rather than with them. That alone should have damned the soul forever. The warp does not forgive resistance. It only studies it. Time inside the Imperium did not pass for him as it did for the Imperium. Wars bled into one another, unanchored by chronology. Acastus fought things that wore the faces of ultramarines long dead, and things that wore no faces at all. He learned that faith could be sharpened into a weapon, but certainty could be hollowed into a trap. He did not hear the Emperor's voice. Instead, he felt an absence where it should have been, like a star gone dark but still exerting gravity. Something watched him. Not a god. Not yet. When at last he emerged from the warp, his armor fused with script he did not remember carving, sigils that caused Auspex spirits to stutter and machine spirits to recoil in confusion. He bore no corruption, yet purity scanners refused to complete their rites. He returned during a battle above Ajax, when Ultramar burned beneath plague skies and Guilliman himself walked the fields of ruin. Drop pods screamed down, and among them fell a lone figure in unmarked ceramite, bearing the aquila fractured down its center. He fought like an ultramarine should, precise, merciless, doctrinal, yet every movement carried an anticipation that bordered on prophecy. Demons recoiled from him, not in fear, but recognition. When the battle was done, apothecaries demanded his gene tests. The results were impossible. Calgar's lineage, pure and true, but threaded with anomalies no Mechanicus lexicon could name. Guilliman studied him in silence for a long time. At last, the Primarch ordered the records sealed and the warrior reassigned under a designation that did not officially exist. The Imperium would not be ready for truths learned in hell. Among the Ultramarines, stories began to circulate like contraband prayers. A Primaris who never slept. A warrior who corrected chaplains mid-litany, citing older, pre-heresy versions no longer in use. When asked where he learned them, Acastus only said, "From those who remember when faith was young." Librarians felt a pressure when he passed, as if reality tightened its grip. He refused honors, refused command, yet other Primaris unconsciously aligned their formations around him. Calgar himself eventually stood before the warrior whose blood echoed his own. The chapter master saw no treachery, no madness, only a vast, patient sorrow. Acastus knelt, but not in submission. It was reverence of a different kind, as one survivor acknowledges another. Neither spoke of the warp. Some scars demand silence to keep the galaxy intact. The ecclesiarchy took interest, as it always does when miracles refuse to behave. Inquisitors followed, then vanished from the record. Reports describe interrogations that ended with the questioner shaken, unable to articulate what had been learned. Acastus did not preach, but his presence bent belief. Soldiers prayed harder near him, yet doubted more deeply when he left. On one dead world, he ordered a shrine destroyed because it was too loud in the warp. No demon incursion followed, only a sudden, total quiet that unsettled even the Astartes. It became clear that whatever had returned from the Imperium was not merely resistant to chaos, but comprehended it in ways the Imperium could not allow to spread. Knowledge has weight. Some truths collapse empires simply by being spoken. During the later phases of the Indomitus Crusade, Acastus was deployed to war zones marked for exterminatus, places already written off by fate. Again and again, impossible victories followed. Not clean ones, ruined worlds still burned. But the outcome shifted, as if destiny itself hesitated. Astropathic choirs reported echoes arriving before their messages were sent. Chronometers desynchronized near his strike cruisers. A Mechanicus savant suggested that Acastus existed slightly out of phase with causality. Guilliman dismissed the claim, yet ordered the data archived under Omega Obscura protocols. The Primarch had seen enough of Destiny's chains to recognize a weak link. If the warp had learned to return its prisoners altered, then the Long War had entered a new, more dangerous age. The truth, hinted only in fractured logs, is that Acastus carried something back with him. Not a demon, not a god, but a memory of how reality once resisted the warp before the fall, before belief fed the storm. He could feel fractures in fate like stress lines in ceramite. Once, on the bridge of his vessel, he asked a navigator a forbidden question. "What do you see when you look at the Emperor's light?" The navigator wept and could not answer. After that, Acastus was never again assigned to fleet actions involving Terra. Some presences are too close to the throne to be tolerated. In the final surviving record, dated only by the phrase, "After the silence of Vigilus," Acastus stands alone on a ruined moon, gazing at a warp rift that is slowly, unnaturally closing. He removes his helm. The stars reflected in his eyes are wrong, older, dimmer, as if remembering a universe that should not exist. He activates a private Vox channel and speaks a single sentence addressed to no known recipient. "It has begun to notice me again." The transmission ends. No follow-up exists. Somewhere in the Imperium, a sealed slab of adamantine begins to vibrate, and an ancient question scratches once more at the edge of being answered. The adamantine slab did not crack, yet those sworn to its guardianship felt it breathe. Beneath Macraga, in vaults where even echoes were catalogued and silenced, the reliquary serfs woke screaming from identical dreams. In them, a warrior stood before the Emperor's throne, not kneeling, not defiant, simply waiting, while the golden light flickered like a dying lumen. Chaplains dismissed the reports as warp backwash from the Great Rift, but faith falters when repetition replaces coincidence. A single phrase began to surface in prayer margins and confessional mutterings, "Returned wrong." No one could say who had written it first. The words seemed older than ink. Somewhere between dogma and dread, belief began to bruise. Among the Ultramarines, the Primaris felt it most keenly. Veterans of the Indomitus Crusade found their catechisms stumbling on familiar verses. They still believed, but belief now required effort, like lifting a blade grown heavier overnight. In the Reclusiam, Skullhelms watched in mute judgment as Chaplain Othris paused mid-sermon, seized by a thought he could not banish. If the Emperor protects, why does he send back what the warp has claimed? He struck the lectern, declaring doubt a sin. Yet later, alone, he replayed memories of Valen's Acastus standing unmoving amid demon fire, untouched not by purity, but by understanding. Faith built on fear could not survive comprehension. That realization festered quietly, unseen, as all rot does. The ecclesiarchy reacted as institutions always do when threatened by ambiguity, with processions, proclamations, and purges disguised as clarifications. New sermons emphasized obedience over understanding, sacrifice over salvation. Shrines were rededicated, icons repainted with harsher lines, the emperor's mercy subtly de-emphasized in favor of his wrath. On shrine worlds near the Great Rift, pilgrims vanished after claiming visions of a silent warrior who carried no halo. Cardinals denounced these accounts as heretical hallucinations, yet quietly ordered their archivists to collect every scrap. Knowledge is dangerous, but ignorance is fatal. In private chambers, high prelates asked forbidden questions. If the warp can return a loyal son changed, what does that imply about the nature of damnation and redemption? The Inquisition fractured along familiar fault lines. The Ordo Malleus demanded Acastus's immediate containment, citing non-corruptive warp adaptation as a theoretical impossibility. The Ordo Hereticus argued he was a vector of ideological contamination more insidious than any demon. Only the Ordo Xenos remained silent, their sealed communiques stamped with sigils no one else possessed. A conclave was convened on Thalassar, its minutes redacted before they were recorded. 3 inquisitors entered, 1 left. The survivor bore no wounds, yet requested mind wipe within the hour. Before the procedure, she spoke a single sentence to the attending confessor. "He doesn't lie. He remembers." The confessor did not report this. He burned the record and wept until dawn. On a dozen warfronts, subtle disobedience spread. Orders were followed, but not always as written. Exterminatus was delayed. Civilians were evacuated when doctrine forbade it. Commanders could not explain why they hesitated, only that something felt irrevocable now. Acastus never gave these orders. He did not need to. His presence altered the calculus of obedience, introducing a possibility the Imperium had long denied, that loyalty might include refusal. Guilliman sensed the shift like pressure building along an old fault. He summoned historians, philosophers, warriors who remembered Ultramar before faith hardened into law. None could give him an answer he wanted. The Primarch, son of reason, began to fear reason's return might unmake the Imperium he was sworn to save. In the depths of a ruined basilica on Eax, a lone priest uncovered a fresco buried beneath layers of sanctioned repainting. It depicted the Emperor not as a god, but as a man standing among warriors, one hand raised not in command, but caution. At his side stood a faceless Astartes, unmarked by heraldry. The priest knew with soul-deep certainty that this image had not been painted recently. It predated the heresy. He reported his finding to the authorities. The basilica was sealed. The priest was declared martyred, yet the image persisted, copied from memory by hands that should not have known it. Truth, once seen, resists erasure. Valen's Acastus felt the tightening net and did not flee. He moved instead toward convergence points, places where belief and reality chafed raw. On a dead forge moon, he stood amid broken titans and spoke with a tech priest whose logic engines had begun asking questions without parameters. On a pilgrim ship adrift, beyond Astronomican reach, he listened to confessions he did not absolve. He told no one what he had seen in the warp, only what he had learned, that the Imperium feeds not only on emotion, but on certainty. The more absolute the belief, the richer the feast. This was the lesson that terrified them. The breaking moment came without fanfare. An astropathic choir transmitted a vision across half a sector before their minds burned out. The Emperor upon the throne, not dead, not alive but bound, his chains forged from prayer, his prison sustained by devotion, weaponized into dogma. In the vision's periphery stood Valens Acastus, not as a liberator, but as a witness. The signal was scrubbed within minutes, yet too many had heard it. Riots erupted, crusades stalled. Faith did not collapse, it questioned itself. And in the High Lord's chambers, a decision was made that would never be recorded. The final fragment comes from a source no longer trusted, a custodian's private chronicle sealed beneath Terra itself. It states that Acastus was summoned to the Imperial Palace, granted audience not with Guilliman, but with the throne's deepest ward. What transpired is unknown. What is known is this. Moments after, the Astronomicon dimmed for a single heartbeat, and across the Imperium, every astropath felt the Emperor turn his gaze, not outward, but inward. Somewhere in the warp, something laughed softly, as if a door long sealed had finally been noticed from the other side. The stars dimmed unevenly after that heartbeat of darkness, as if the galaxy itself had forgotten how to shine with conviction. Across 100 war zones, commanders stared at Auspec's readouts that still functioned, yet felt wrong, like prayers spoken without faith. A dying guardsman on Carthax, Secundus, confessed not sins but confusion, asking his priest why the Emperor needed belief if he was already perfect. The priest had no answer. He gave the absolution anyway, voice trembling beneath artillery thunder. Faith endured, but it did so wounded, limping forward on habit alone. Every shrine candle now seemed to gutter a moment too long before burning steady, and that hesitation gnawed at the soul more cruelly than open heresy ever could. In the librarious vaults of Ultramar, sealed tomes began to resonate softly, harmonizing with frequencies no human ear should perceive. Librarians entered trances unbidden, reliving memories that were not theirs. Visions of a younger Imperium, where truth was discussed openly, where the warp was studied rather than feared. Each vision ended the same way, with a choice unmade. Those who woke recorded nothing. They burned incense, recited litanies, and pretended the ache behind their eyes was exhaustion. Yet the dreams spread. Knowledge once buried had begun to surface like a corpse in a flooded trench. Valens Acastus walked no more battlefields. He was confined to silence, though no cell could truly hold him. Custodians guarded his presence rather than his body, standing rigid as statues while he stared into nothing. He spoke rarely now, but when he did, it was to ask questions no one could answer without betraying something sacred. "If the Emperor suffers," he asked once quietly, "is it sin to wish to ease it?" The custodian did not reply. His gauntlet clenched until ceramite creaked. Even the 10,000 had been trained to kill threats, not to consider mercy as rebellion. Beyond the Imperium's borders, the warp grew restless. Demon hosts gathered not in celebration, but in unease. Prophets of the dark gods screamed contradictory visions of a future where faith starved chaos, and of one where chaos wore faith like a crown. Something old shifted in the Imperium, a tectonic movement beneath storms that had raged unchanged for millennia. The ruinous powers sensed not an enemy, but a correction, an error long embedded in reality beginning to resolve itself. That terrified them more than any crusade ever could. On a forgotten agri-world orbiting a red, failing star, an old woman prayed every night beside a cracked shrine. She had lost sons, grandsons, and hope in equal measure, yet she prayed still, not for victory, but for understanding. One night, as the star flared its last, she felt a presence beside her. Not radiant, not terrible, simply tired. In her final moments, she understood something she had never been taught, that divinity could ache, and that obedience without compassion was not faith, but abandonment. She died smiling. The shrine wept rust. Guilliman convened a council none would ever admit existed. No ecclesiarchs, No inquisitors, only warriors, historians, and one silent Primaris who had walked through hell and returned with questions. The Primarch listened as Acastus spoke of the warp not as an enemy, but as a mirror, one that reflected belief until belief became law, then prison. Guilliman's hands trembled. He had built empires on reason, then watched them ossify into dogma. Now reason threatened to return, sharpened by suffering. He dismissed the council without verdict. Some decisions could not survive consensus. The first open fracture came on Terra itself. A minor cult, barely noticed, began preaching that the Emperor's will was not static, that he endured because he chose to, not because he was trapped. The cult was purged within hours. Yet during the execution, the Astronomicon flared brighter than it had in centuries, then dimmed again, as if reacting. Astropaths across the Sol system screamed in unison. They described chains loosening. They described pain giving way to resolve. The reports were sealed. Fear spread anyway. Violens Acastus vanished the same day. No alarms, no breach. One moment he was there, the next only the echo of his presence remained, like warmth after a fire dies. In his place lay a fragment of stone not found anywhere on Terra, carved with symbols predating the Imperium, the Mechanicus, even Old Night. Guilliman recognized them from forbidden archives, marks associated with the first human psychers, before gods had names. The implication was unbearable. The Emperor had not been the first to bind the warp, only the last to bear the cost alone. In the closing vision that follows, whether prophecy or memory remains contested, the Emperor stands not upon a throne, but before a choice. The chains are not broken, only offered back. Valens Acastus waits nearby, no longer entirely human, no longer entirely singular, his form fracturing into countless possible futures. The voice that speaks is not the Emperor's alone, but carries his weight. It asks whether humanity is finally ready to carry its own burden. The galaxy holds its breath, and somewhere, in the warp's deepest dark, the gods begin to fear being forgotten. Silence came first, thick as void frost, pressing against the thoughts of those who still listened for guidance. Across the Imperium, oaths once spoken with fire now tasted of ash. Regiments marched because marching was all they had left. Chapters fought because stopping meant admitting the question, gnawing at their gene-forged hearts. Was duty still holy if the truth beneath it had been buried by fear? On a shattered manufactorum world, a sergeant recited the litany of endurance while tightening a dead man's grip around a lasgun, whispering apologies to an emperor he could no longer picture clearly. Above him, warships aligned for bombardment, their captains hesitating one fatal second longer than doctrine allowed. The galaxy did not shatter all at once. It bent, quietly, as if bracing for impact. In the cloisters of Terra, custodians stood watch over corridors that now felt narrower, as though the palace itself had drawn inward. Each footstep echoed with remembered loyalty, with centuries spent guarding a will they had never been permitted to question. One among them, old beyond counting, felt a tremor of doubt he mistook for exhaustion. He remembered the Primaris who had stood before him unbowed, asking whether mercy could be treason. That memory became a wound. Custodians did not pray, yet that night he found himself staring at the throne's distant glow, wondering if vigilance without compassion was merely another kind of neglect. He tightened his spear and swore renewed loyalty, even as something inside him fractured soundlessly. Far from Terra, the warp boiled with suppressed violence. The dark gods raged not in unity but in competition, each sensing that the feast was changing flavor. Entire demon legions clashed without mortal cause, shredding each other over conflicting visions of the future. Some foresaw an age of starvation, where belief turned inward and fed no gods at all. Others foresaw ascension, faith refined into something sharper, more absolute. In that chaos, whispers spread of a figure moving between currents, neither prey nor predator, altering outcomes by mere presence. The Imperium recoiled from him, not in hatred, but in recognition of a pattern it had failed to erase. On Macragge, Guilliman walked alone through halls built to echo triumph. Statues of Primarchs stared down, frozen in perfection that history had never honored. He remembered building systems meant to endure without gods, then watching them rot into superstition when left alone too long. Now he stood at the edge of undoing, holding fragments of truth that could either save the Imperium or tear it apart entirely. He thought of Valen's Acastus, of what it meant that such a warrior could exist. Guilliman clenched his fists, knuckles whitening. Leadership demanded sacrifice. He had always known that. He had never imagined the sacrifice might be the lie itself. Faith broke differently among the common folk. Some turned to fanaticism, screaming litanies louder as doubt crept closer. Others fell into silence, performing rituals with mechanical devotion stripped of hope. On a hive world drowning in ash storms, a mother taught her child to pray not for protection, but for clarity. The child asked what clarity meant. The mother could not answer. Above them, Arbites crushed a riot sparked by rumors of an emperor who suffered willingly. Blood washed through the gutters, mixing with incense runoff, and the city carried on, neither saved nor condemned, just enduring as it always had. The Astartes felt the fracture as a phantom pain in their gene seed. Battle brothers who had never hesitated before now paused before executing prisoners, memories of Acastus's words lingering unbidden. Chaplains cracked down hard, branding hesitation as weakness, mercy as corruption. A Black Templar crusade burned 3 systems to prove its purity, yet in the aftermath, their emperor's champion dreamed of a throne without chains and woke screaming. No record was made of his doubts. The chapter marched on, banners pristine, souls less so. Somewhere beyond charted space, a star went nova without warning, its psychic shockwave rippling through the warp like a drumbeat. Astropaths collapsed, bleeding light from their eyes, screaming of a door opening not outward, but inward, toward humanity itself. The Administratum logged the event as stellar instability. The Inquisition classified the screams. Yet the echo remained, a resonance felt by those attuned to more than survival. Destiny was accelerating, no longer content to wait upon indecision. Valen's Acastus did not reappear, yet his absence was a louder presence than any crusade. Worlds where he had once walked experienced anomalies. Warp storms that parted briefly, prayers that went unanswered, yet brought peace, machines that functioned without rights for a single impossible moment. Scholars whispered that he had become a vector, not of corruption, but of transition. A living proof that the Emperor's burden could be shared, or refused. To many, that idea was more terrifying than chaos. As fleets gathered for wars that would decide nothing and everything, a final transmission cut through the void, bypassing choirs and codes alike. It carried no words, only a sensation. Resolve, layered atop grief, like steel over bone. Those who felt it understood, without explanation, that a choice was imminent, one that would redefine loyalty, divinity, and damnation itself. In the throne room, the Emperor's light flared brighter than ever before, and then steadied, as if waiting for permission. The moment came without trumpet or warning, only a pressure behind the eyes felt simultaneously by saints and sinners alike. Terra shuddered, not from bombardment, but from choice. The throne room filled with a sound never recorded in any catechism, a breath drawn by something immeasurably vast. The Emperor's light did not flare this time. It narrowed, focused, like a blade finally choosing its edge. Custodians fell to one knee as gravity itself seemed to hesitate. Somewhere in the deep machinery beneath the palace, Ancient failsafes screamed themselves into silence. For the first time since the heresy, the Golden Throne responded not as a cage, but as an instrument awaiting command. In the Imperium, storms tore themselves apart. Demons shrieked as their forms blurred, cohesion failing where certainty had once anchored them. Gods raged, but their fury fractured, each strike landing against absence instead of resistance. Tzeentch's labyrinth folded inward. Khorne's roar echoed unanswered. Nurgle felt something like loss and recoiled. Slaanesh laughed, and then stopped. Across the warp, a pattern rewrote itself, not erased, not destroyed, but revised. Faith no longer fed blindly, it began to ask where it was going. Valen's Acastus emerged where no ship could ever reach, at the intersection of thought and matter, standing before the throne not as flesh alone, but as accumulated possibility. His form was fractured, past, present, and unreal futures overlapping like a shattered reflection. He knelt, not in submission but in solidarity. Around him lay echoes of humanity's first psychers, forgotten martyrs who had once tried to master the warp without gods. Their bones were the foundation of the Imperium's greatest lie. Acastus spoke, and his voice carried the weight of every soldier who had ever obeyed without understanding. "Let them choose," he said, "or let it end." The Emperor answered, not in words but in sensation, agony unending, vigil eternal, love weaponized into obligation. The throne was not merely life support. It was a promise humanity had chained him to, forged from fear of its own weakness. To release him was to risk annihilation or evolution. To remain was to ensure survival at the cost of stagnation. Guilliman felt the truth slam into him like orbital impact. This was never about gods. It was about trust. And trust had been murdered 10,000 years ago. On 100,000 worlds, people screamed as visions burned into their minds. Not commands, memories. Humanity before the Emperor. Fragile, curious, divided, yet unbound. Then humanity beneath him, united, powerful, terrified of falling again. Soldiers dropped their weapons, sobbing. Others fired wildly at nothing, unable to bear the weight of unfiltered truth. Some prayed harder than ever, clinging to certainty like a drowning man grips wreckage. Faith did not die. It splintered, each fragment reflecting a different future. The sacrifice was quiet. Acastus stepped forward as the throne's engines screamed in protest. He did not replace the Emperor. He bridged him, a conduit of shared burden, diffusing the strain of godhood across a will that had survived the warp without surrender. Flesh burned. Time folded. His name unraveled, becoming something closer to function than identity. The throne dimmed, not weakening but redistributing. For the first time, the Emperor was not alone. When the light settled, Terra still stood. The Astronomicon burned, steadier, narrower, less blinding. Warp travel did not cease, but it changed, requiring intent rather than rote prayer. Demons did not vanish, but they recoiled from uncertainty. Across the Imperium, astropaths wept, not from pain, but relief. Guilliman collapsed to one knee, feeling centuries lift and centuries more descend. He knew this would fracture the Imperium beyond repair. He also knew it was necessary. In the aftermath, silence ruled. No proclamations were made, no truths announced. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. The ecclesiarchy tightened its grip. The Inquisition sharpened its knives. Chapters argued behind closed doors. Faith persisted, but now it watched itself, questioned itself. Somewhere between obedience and rebellion, humanity had taken its first step toward something unknown. Deep within the warp, a presence stirred, ancient, amused, patient. It had watched gods rise and fall before. It had seen cycles repeat until they bored even eternity. As the Emperor's burden shifted and humanity's fate bent ever so slightly off its ancient track, the presence smiled without lips or mercy. change had always been its favorite constant. In the long hush that followed, the galaxy did not celebrate. It mourned in ways too subtle for victory hymns. Cathedrals still stood, but their bells rang less often, as if reluctant to disturb something newly fragile. On battlefields where millions had died, the wind carried banners half buried in ash. Their heraldry faded to colors no longer claimed with certainty. The Imperium endured. Of course it did, but endurance now felt like a question rather than an answer. I record this not as a judge, but as a witness, one of the last remembrances permitted to write without censure. My ink trembles because history itself seems unsure of what it has become. I walked through a shrine world whose reliquaries had cracked during the Great Shift. Saints lay shattered on marble floors, their faces frozen in expressions that might once have been ecstasy, now indistinguishable from grief. Pilgrims still knelt, but their prayers were quieter, more intimate, spoken like confessions rather than demands. A child asked her mother if the emperor could hear whispers. The mother said yes, then hesitated and added, "I think he listens now." That pause was the most honest thing I have heard in 10,000 years. On a forgotten plain where titans once clashed, silence ruled absolute. No scavengers came, no rites were spoken. Only wreckage and sky, the bones of gods rusting beneath uncaring stars. I stood there until night fell, thinking of Valen's Acastus, not as warrior, not as myth, but as absence. A bridge burned away once crossed. The price of easing a god's burden was anonymity, dissolution into function and memory. Is that martyrdom, or is it escape? The Imperium has no word precise enough to hold such a thing. Guilliman returned to his duties, though something in his bearing had changed. He no longer spoke of destiny. He spoke of stewardship. Laws were rewritten quietly, campaigns recalculated. Always the same question hovered unspoken: how much truth can humanity survive at once? I watched him from a gallery as he studied a star map riddled with new variables, a Primarch burdened not by godhood, but by choice. Perhaps that was always the heavier crown. The warp remains. Chaos still howls. Demons still claw at reality's skin. Yet there are nights when the Imperium feels thinner, less certain of itself. Astropaths describe it as resistance, like pushing through water rather than fire. Some say faith has changed its flavor. Others say the gods are simply adapting. Both may be true. Eternity has room for multiple lies. In the underhives, cultists preach louder than ever, desperate to reclaim absolutes. In quiet homes, people light candles without iconography, whispering hopes no doctrine approves. The ecclesiarchy condemns this as dangerous individualism. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it always was. Survival has never been safe. I have seen banners lowered without ceremony, their wars concluded not by victory but exhaustion. I have seen Astartes pause before battle, not in doubt, but remembrance of a time when obedience was simpler. I have seen priests stare too long at the stars, as if waiting for an answer that does not come. So I leave these words where time may erode them, as it erodes all certainties. Was faith ever meant to be unchanging, or was it always a dialogue between fear and hope? And if endurance demands sacrifice, who decides which souls are spent to buy another dawn? The stars do not answer. They only burn and fade and burn again. If you have walked these ruins with me, if these echoes lingered in your thoughts, stand witness. Leave your mark upon this chronicle. Like, subscribe, share these words, and tell me in the comments what you believe endures when gods themselves must learn to breathe.